But at the same time, we see it quite a lot at the moment, don't we, with TikTok and stuff, and using shopping platforms like Shopify and Vinted. Vinted's a big thing in the UK now, about, selling your old clothes and, people buying big bundles of clothes and making lots of money at it. And now suddenly HMRC, our regulatory authority for collecting tax, are starting to nibble away where Vinted have to report what your sales are. It's people always looking for a shortcut to make more money, which is understandable. With the cost of living, we want more disposable income for ourselves. But I think it's nibbled away. All of these things, they're not all responsible in one way, but they're all together jointly have eroded the fact that you can be a professional at what you do, like Mr. Ben, our leading camera person, and then a young person who can be interviewed and turn up, who suddenly maybe has a university degree here, mass communications, is a whiz on their smartphone at making TikToks and editing and all that sort of stuff, but still lacks, I would also say, concentration when it comes to being able to take positive advice and feedback. They almost feel like it's personal. When you give them some opportunity to find out something, they feel like it's a personal attack because they know what they're doing. And I think that's quite damaging, really, because we're reflecting that onto young people, and it's not necessarily their fault.
It's not. So something really important to me also is the fact that you've mentioned that the internet did a damage, but it's long gone. I believe that maybe repairing the damage would take a lot of work, because it took us, I think, from year 2000 that there were new inventions, the social media, the Gmail, etc. There has been that culture that when you just go into the internet now or log into any of your social media, you find someone telling you that I made so amount of money in this so time from this year. We went from broke persons to now financially stable persons and all of that. And I think where we're getting it wrong is the youth are exposed to all this content and they believe it's a easy fix, easy thing to do. What can we do to change that mindset? Because I tell you, I'm really disappointed that I'm not a Gen Z or Gen Z, if you call it that way, but I see a lot of young people every day, and I feel terrible that no matter what you do, it's difficult for you to bring them out of that delusion or the illusion of it's easy to make money because someone on the internet put their phone up, spoke about the way they make money, which can be the same. They must put a lot of work and energy into it. What can we do to change that mindset, instant gratification perspective?
Yeah, I think when you visit Nigeria, if you come from the global north, wherever you want to describe it, I think if you take the time to spend time with Nigerian people, particularly younger people, and there's a massive Nigerian younger population, youth, that you understand that they have all the solutions to all of the issues that Nigeria itself and the States and Africa itself has. So they don't need the global north's reconfigured way of helping them. What they need to do is rise up and take that opportunity themselves. Now, I have no idea what it must be like to be a Nigerian youth now, 15, 16, 17. Maybe you're not old enough to do this, but you're old enough to go out and work. You've got to hustle to live. All of the support structure that you would have if you were a young person living in Cambodia or China or America or the UK might have, or Germany. How do you even see a possibility and stay positive? So a smartphone, which offers you an alternate reality where you can shape and own your own narrative, almost like an avatar of your life, if you like, that can be a powerful tool to help you to educate yourself, because there's people on there giving good advice, business advice, empowerment, how to make money, how to hustle. But there's also people that make content that exploits that very need for you to be able to move ahead, that sells you the illusion and the delusion, the fact that you can get ahead. And so you get young people come here, for example, or people that have come to our storytelling labs or our unconference, people we're very fortunate to meet when we're out at events, who are wanting to do the hard work, but they don't have the opportunity. And they come into S24 and it almost seems like it's too easy because there's people here that are willing to help them and give them advice and mentorship. We've got a young lady here today who's being mentored in the studio while we're making this. But that's because they've understood that the mentor has put back onto them the responsibility of turning up, being well-groomed, communicating with people. So almost like the value of taking your time. And I think people really struggle with this education has been finished, it's lifelong learning. You know, whether you look at it as watching a TEDx, doing a YouTube channel, or doing an extra course or a diploma, or one of our corporate courses, if you like, one of our sort of, more practical courses, because a lot of people are lacking in these practical skills. They can tell you about it in theory, but they've never done it. We've seen it this week. Young people come in here who have got all of the qualifications. You put them in front of a camera or ask them to help do anything technical, and they freeze because they know how to do it because they've watched someone do it on YouTube, or they might have read a how-to wiki, but they've not actually done it. And I think that's a real failure of the system, a failure of education, which means that we've got many qualified people to do what we're sitting here doing today, but very few have ever actually sat in this chair, know what it feels like to be able to control the nerves, answer the question, eye contact, but also be prepared. Have done the hard work to get where you are and speak as an expert, because you're an expert through doing rather than you're just qualified. Yes.
So are we living in what is termed as disposable culture, where people replace jobs, values, attention, even relationships too quickly?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's interesting. In Britain, we have this whole thing around sort of upcycling and recycling and fixing old things. You can go along and a group of people will help you to fix your toaster or your microwave or your old smartphone and stuff. And of course, you go anywhere in Nigeria on the street and you can get anything fixed. I love that kind of what we've lost in the global north, I think, which is you have to fix it because there is no alternative. From need comes innovation. And what it means is that if we've got disposable items, we treat our relationships disposably as well. Wives, girlfriends, partners, boyfriends, we have a disposability when it comes to our smartphones. And I think what happens in work is that suddenly someone asks you why you did something, or maybe that's not the best way of doing it. Would you like to see it? And suddenly it's a personal attack and a personal front. Well, because on social media and in the world, that avatar of me is invincible, indestructible, and 100% right all the time. Well, that's not reality. And so I think we get to the situation where, I said in the staff meeting, didn't I, on Friday, I think some of the, if you're an intern and this is your first job, you might think some of the things that we just spoke about dress code and respect for people and bullying might seem a little bit harsh, okay? But for those of you that have worked elsewhere, particularly in the industry, you might actually think, would you still be in your old job if you'd have had a staff meeting like this where you could air your grievances, talk about some of the challenges, celebrate success? Would you have left if you'd have had a staff meeting like we've just had? Probably not, because most of those things would have been grievances with other people not doing their job in the workflow, in production and the newsroom. But also I think it's very much around being able to be honest about the fact that life is challenging out in the real world, and work is exactly the same as that. We talk about work-life balance as if life should be wonderful and work is a challenge. Whereas in fact, when you're a CEO or you work for yourself, as you well know, that becomes very blurred. And if people aren't in that situation, they don't really understand it. And I think that what came out of that staff meeting on Friday was just an appreciation of preparation. And that came from Mr. Mukhtar, our station manager, talking about, have you prepared ahead of time? Even if you don't need to do it, you're prepared. Because if it does happen and it's needed, you're not found wanting. And I think this is what we get with that disposable thing, that suddenly there's certain things we need to keep our head down and not be involved in at work. That doesn't impact me. But if you're part of a team, and of course, when you're alone on social media and it's all about you making money and you're doing your thing, there's no team on social media. It's you consuming from this. Whereas if there were 5 of you sitting there consuming your channels and at least put your phones down, made a cup of coffee and spoke about what you've just done in the last 20 minutes, your work culture would be being developed, that you have to kind of get involved and engage with other people and kind of rub along. Most of the times we're kind of rubbing along, aren't we? Very Nigerian way of looking at it. States, religions, tribes, everybody seems to rub along. And then when an election comes along, it's all about pointing out our differences and stuff and why you should vote for me. So I think we have so many influences now on young people where politics becomes almost like a religious aspect to it as well, a cult, which is we start telling people about why other people are doing better than us. But in fact, if we started sharing some of our stories, I think the work culture we're trying to create here is driven by yourself with that vision as the CEO around family, it's easy to mock. But when you see it work, everybody wants to then work in that environment, because for the first time for some of our staff, I think some of our senior staff, they feel valued and they feel seen and they feel that their experience counts for something. And it's nice to be able to reward people on that basis. Of
course, I believe in that so much as well. In what ways do you think technology changed the psychology of work, especially patience, focus and discipline?
Oh, it's incredible, isn't it? Let's talk about, I often say to people, I'll take a deep dive into TikTok for 20 minutes just so I can lighten my load, my sort of my mental stress from work, maybe, just to have a bit of a laugh. That's that kind of balance, isn't it? Sort of, a bit of humour in some serious stuff when you're talking about security issues and stuff. But I think what happens is for some people, that speed, that ability to select, then gets to work culture, so that when you have a task that maybe is quite complex, that you have to complete, that might need the input of someone else halfway through that stops you with that speed. I think that some of our staff as well struggle with targets as well. So, creating 4 pieces of content in a period of time, that to me, I'm from a generation where having a target like that, 4, seems too low. But also I think it's, well, why would I then stop at 4? I'm driven by my interest in human story.
Why should I not do more?
Human storytelling. If I've done a 5th story and it's really good, why would I not put it in this week? Why would I hold it back for next week? Because that means I've only got 3 next week. So we're constantly up against shortcuts, people looking for shortcuts. Whereas launching the documentary unit the other day, for example, S24 doc unit, within 24 hours, I had 12 documentaries that people had come forward. But if they all go out and make those documentaries, then they're out there doing news reportage and helping their targets anyway. So it's find something that motivates you, that you're interested in, that you're able to kind of move forward with. And technology is fantastic, isn't it? A smartphone allows us to be mobile journalists, go anywhere and create something that people can read, see and watch and listen to. If you can do that, that's not then a shortcut. We're sitting here using real cameras in a studio. We're still replicating CNN, Al Jazeera and BBC, but not because of the equipment and how we're sitting and the backdrop we've got, but in what we're trying to do and say and bring to life, which is those meaningful human stories from people out there on the street. You have to talk to politicians, you have to talk to business leaders, but at the same time, it's the person on the street knows what goes on from the news, but they don't understand. There's no context. And I think if at S24 we can bring that context, technology then means that for every person, if that's the basic unit that people have, it used to be television, it used to be radio, they used to read newspapers, they still exist, but if most people are getting their stuff through a smartphone, we need to be making content that people can engage like this through a smartphone, not just streaming through Twitter and the mainstream.
Yeah. So what would you say, is this decline more visible in younger generations, in your opinion, or are older systems also failing the young?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? A young person can come in and teach you how to do TikTok. Now, as a 60-year-old, I think TikTok's fascinating. I've not been brave enough to try having a TikTok. I think might have been involved in 1 or 2, probably unknowingly. But I think it's the older generation need to understand that just because they think their time was better, the good old days, nothing was good about the good old days. Is it better now? Oh, you have it so easy. You've got smartphones. You can be this. You can swing around. It's not easy being a young person. I'm a father to a 26 and a 27-year-old, and I see that smartphone technology has been part of their life, and in relationships and in work and in how they engage in the world and even how they view what I do are all shaped by their engagement through using social media. So I think we need to take the opportunity where the older generation needs to understand they still need to sit down and support young people just because they seem confident through what they get from social media. As my partner Tina always says, if you don't parent your child, the internet will. So you still need to take that time. Now, you might not have as much sitting around the table, having a meal, parental time, visiting your grandparents as maybe we did growing up, but that's now a reality. So you have to adapt your parenting style, your generational style to engage with young people. Because as soon as you do, you realise that young people, I would say, I always see the good in people, but I think young people in particular, understand fully what's going on in the world, younger now than they ever did. And we need to enhance that. And of course, what we find maybe here and definitely in the UK is that our education system is not fit for turning out well-rounded young individuals ready for an adult world based on the world as it is today. We still educate people for working in factories. We still educate people to keep them where we are. You can even get into politics and talking about, are we educating people in northern Nigeria to actually even be involved in what's going on in Nigeria? It gets very kind of contentious. But I think we need to challenge education better. We need to set up new schools. We need to set up independent schools. We need to set up our own international school of broadcast and digital media, which is in response to the fact that we have so many young people who come to us with the theory through courses like mass communication, but no practice. From day one, you have to touch equipment. You have to be making real content that's building that portfolio. I think it's a very, very big challenge, but it's a societal one.
Yes, and you mentioned something key again, that the good old days were not as good as we used to think. Why did you say that in a short reply? I
think a lot of people used to say, back then it was easier. I always remember my dear old dad died about 2 years ago, but he used to say, when he was younger, they'd left the front door open. They left the front door open on the street they lived. Well, that's because no one had anything to steal. That was no one had televisions or anything to come in and take. But I think we often hark back to, when we have a challenge, we think back to, it was easier then. Well, it was never easier then. I always use that analogy. People say about this and Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Gaza and northeast Nigeria and Boko Haram and stuff like that, and they talk about conflicts as if like the walls are falling in and stuff. The walls have always been falling in. We've always had conflict. It's a sad side of humanity. So let's put it in context. Let's unpick that. Our last trip in November, we flew to Katsina and we stood quite close to the Niger border, interviewing people out on the street. I never felt unsafe at any point. We had 7 policemen around, but we never felt unsafe at any point. Everybody was delighted to see me as a white person from the UK. I think Donald Trump had just 2 days before threatened to bomb Nigeria because of people killing Christians and everything that was going on. And here we were on the ground talking to people and people coming up and going, thank you for coming here and showing people what's going on.
Yes.
Now, that might have changed in the last 6 months, but we need to then, who are we talking to on the ground, not listening to a politician who's never taken the time to come to Nigeria, get on a plane and inconvenience themselves, experience 36 degrees of heat, and go on and explain to someone, well, listen, I thought it was falling apart and here I am. There are challenges and there are always going to be things that don't work, and there are always going to be terrible incidents of, attacks on police officers or,
on military personnel, etc.
Suicide bombers and stuff. But that is the reality of the situation we're in. And we need to be having these bigger conversations around governance and accountability that ultimately leads to that instability.
In a nutshell, what is the difference between rejecting toxic work culture and rejecting hard work itself?
You see, I think that also is something about your interview process when you're interviewing someone. And we need to bring, as employers, I think, more rigor when it comes to using your word, using more rigor when it comes to interviewing people and putting in multiple interviews. So not just one office interview, but maybe using an HR consultant who's spoken to that person, talking to previous employers, but then taking all that into account and giving someone an opportunity to physically go and do it with some of your team to demonstrate that actually it doesn't matter that you don't have all of those things. You have an aptitude for something. Because I think everyone has a natural talent for doing things. You can teach them certain things. But I think it's not laziness. For me, it's nothing to do with laziness. It's just not understanding the work culture, because they've had 15, 16, 17 years of work culture on social media, which is very different from the work environment.
When did work stop being seen as craft, duty, or contribution and start becoming merely survival or transaction?
For me personally, I think it's the experiences that you have in your life, isn't it? I can remember being 18. I'd just done 2 A levels in geography and geology, and I sat in an office and we were in a training room, and there were about 20 people that were starting in that intake, and the person next to me had the same amount of O levels as me, but not A levels, and I was being paid £500 more. And that was a very early indication into qualifications meant you got more money. That was when education was valued. I think we sit in a situation now where anybody can get a degree. And there's absolutely no expectation that they will use that degree to work in that sector. So how many young people are there out there at the moment in Nigeria with mass communications degrees that have used the facilities as good as they are at the educational institute that they were, college or university, but would never be able to work in here, not because we have screens or microphones or cameras, they wouldn't be able to work in here because there's never time taken to give them the experience of sitting in the chair and just recording into
with
a
the
camera.
skills, yes. Are people still looking for meaningful work or just manageable work, in your opinion, especially with that experience in the recent recruitment phase that we're in?
What a very good question. I think people are still looking for something that can help them survive.
So more transactional.
Yeah, and are looking to do the barest minimum to get the maximum pay that they can. And I think that's really sad because it's society that's failed them to understand that actually it's who you are, not what you do, that actually brings the most to a business. You know, they value you more if you were to be who you are rather than stop pretending to be what you think that we want. And I think, like I said, there's a real sort of transparent ball, if you like, where someone looking for a job and an employer kind of disappear into, and they both have unrealistic expectations, and then they pop out and they go, well, that was a terrible interview. Well, actually, no, you did really well. You just didn't do the best that you could have done because the person was interviewing you incorrectly about the work that you were going to do.
So in one sentence, what is the deepest loss inside today's work culture?
The value of previous experience.
The value of previous experience. Stay with us. When we return, we move from diagnosis to geography. Is this decline global, or does it wear different faces in Nigeria, Africa, and the global village? Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Yeah. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, it's still S24 Insight Special Saturday edition. And we've been talking about declining work culture. And moving on, Mr. John mentioned something, and because there was geography in what I said initially, is declining work culture a big problem? Does it show emergency, desperation, depending on where you are? And how does this crisis look in Nigeria specifically is something that we should look at, and also the global north, the global south, or because of technology and internet, we see ourselves as a global village citizens. For myself, I'll put something and I'll see someone from the other end of the world in a different continent engaging, for instance. If you post a particular thing about a particular person, you find more coming from the global south because maybe there's been investment in technology and the internet. And so people see that and it's like an attack. This person is maybe against the government or is a critic of the government, etc. So let's go a bit deeper where we put the Nigeria, Africa, and the global village perspective into it. Do you think the declining global culture or the declining work culture is a global problem, or does it show up differently depending on where you are?
I think it shows up differently depending on where you are, because the global north has this way of viewing the world, which is, you know, they're better than everybody else, and that the global south is somewhere that needs help. So when you then, I was in India in January, and my work here in Nigeria and colleagues I've got all over the world that I speak to quite regularly in support, that you realise that, you know, smartphone technology to your average citizen was a game changer when it came to engaging with the world and educating themselves, you know, for making up for maybe a failure in state education, that you can now access YouTube videos, online courses that you can do for free, watching TEDx, those kind of things, that you can empower yourself and educate yourself. So I think that's really important. I think the thing that's come along quite recently that shows for me the absolute distance between the global north and the global south is having a conversation with people about AI. So in the global north, for example, we talk about AI as, it's going to impact jobs. I'm going to lose my job. AI is going to do this. It's going to be terrible.
I think it's the same as the global south as well.
But it's also very different when you talk to younger people, because it's about what AI can allow you to do. Because it allows you to, the young AI guy I interviewed here the other day was just talking about, building this app that allows you to deal with your workflow, helps you to answer phone calls, helps you to kind of like run your business and stuff like that. Well, that's a very different conversation from people that I've had within the global north. Yeah. And I think that kind of shows you what that impact is, that technology has, but also on work culture, is that there's that expectation is that you can use technology to better yourself and improve yourself. Whereas in the global north, it's very much around how can technology just help me do my job, not necessarily improve me. But we still come back to, I think, education and that valuing of lifelong learning, that you never stop learning. Life is an apprenticeship. And the people that fit in with that old way of, well, let's go off and see what that guy does, and let's go and see how she does her job, which we encourage our staff to do, learn about other people's departments. You suddenly have an appreciation of being part of a team. Social media is not based on a team. Social media is based on you. And it came through in the interviews recently that we did, particularly anybody that was interested in digital content, media, digital content, video editing and stuff, that the freelance mindset, which is you can work for multiple people at different times, has created this digital nomad kind of term. Now, to me, a digital nomad is me going and working in a bar in Cambodia, being able to come to Nigeria and work in a coffee shop, and then work at the airport. And when by the time I get home, I could have completed my task because of Wi-Fi. I can still be John Costa, the consultant. Whereas I think a lot of people treat jobs now like digital nomads. So they'll stay with you for a period of time until they get something better. And it's fascinating that as soon as you start talking to someone in an interview about, when you change your body language and you start using language about you're part of the team, it'd be great. I think you'd really contribute. And they feel like they've got a job. You can see them straight away. Their brain shifts like that. Their eyes glaze over and they start thinking about, well, I'll stay for 12 months and I can get a better job. It's interesting.
Unfortunately. Yeah. You've been to Nigeria in the past 2 decades, a couple of times. From a year ago or less than a year ago, it's been your 3rd time in Nigeria. How does this crisis look in Nigeria specifically, if you put the context of our current experience or ongoing experience around recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, I like getting out the vehicle. I think this is the kind of thing as well. As someone who's come to Nigeria, we talk about security all the time. So you kind of get driven around in a particular vehicle. And I like getting out and talking to people, and particularly when we were in Katsina, going, through the markets, just walking through the markets, talking to people while you were doing interviews in Hausa, just, going up and talking to people. And you don't know the language, and it's quite clearly that you're happy to be there. They're happy to be there. You don't have that terrified look on your face. I've been around the world many times. I know what, a difficult situation looks like, and I was completely comfortable. And I think then when young people come up and they engage with you and ask for your photo and you say to them, what do you do? Are you on Instagram? And you follow them on Instagram and stuff like that. That's what we really need to be starting to think about now. That, I when we're driving through Abuja to meetings and stuff like that, I look at all those people running, micro businesses, small businesses, survival businesses on the side of the road. And I'm just thinking, how many of those could run a successful business? How many of those could be, running a corporation? How many of those could be a school teacher? How many of those could be a nurse or a doctor? How many of those could be the next president in 20 years, who actually understands what it's like to be a street child, if only they were given the opportunity? And it's not about taking everybody and making them entrepreneurial. It's not making everybody run their own micro business. Some people are managers, some people are workers, some people are leaders and visionaries. That's life. That's always been like that throughout history. But at the same time, the barrier that's stopping you from reaching your full potential is education, and it's access to education and the cost of education and the cost of school uniforms and electricity and Wi-Fi and living in a secure location where, as a Nigerian citizen, the thing that we talk about and the acts and the laws that we've got and what politicians tell us as Nigerian citizens that we have as our rights are not available to everybody. So suddenly we get people that are further from the margins, people with disabilities, people that are living in communities that suddenly are on land that they can be got rid of. How are we looking to use the laws to protect those people and include them in the day-to-day life of a Nigerian citizen? Not every time there's a political an election where suddenly like, we want your vote, but you never do anything for me. And I think the sooner we can start showing through S24 from a global perspective how that is a thing in India and how that thing is a thing in Cambodia and how that's a thing in other African countries, can we start to think about, well, how are we going to get these young people to come forward and say, I've got solutions for some of these issues, which I totally and 100% agree that they do, but don't involve having to pin them to either a political party or to a particular religion. It's more about, well, actually, how can, from a humanity perspective, we work together to improve our environment?
Yeah. So I'm sure that you've worked in some African countries, especially with the Dog Hub West Africa that you do. Across Africa, do you see a productivity crisis or a system crisis being misread as a productivity crisis? Oh,
yeah. I think anybody's view in the global north of Africa is still 150% shaped by Live Aid. Interestingly, the Biafran War, which was the first conflict, 67 to 70 on our TVs. I remember as a child seeing that on the television for a program where you could donate money and clothes and stuff like that. How that pot belly kind of thing, you know, with young people, everybody living in a mud hut, that stereotype there, I would say, is 100% still across the north perspective of Africa. And then when you look at, I mean, even this picture behind us, you know, when suddenly you show people, you know, supermarkets and access to things and stuff, and how transport infrastructure and, you know, the way things are, the access to things, that they're almost shocked that could actually be in Africa. And I think, you know, in particular, in a Pan-African way, could do more rather than just individual countries, could actually do more as a continent to stand up at places like the UN and the IMF and the European Commission and turn around and say, well, look, you know, we've just had enough about how we are represented. You know, it's a stereotype, it's a lazy stereotype. You know, we could out-innovate you if we need to. And I think that's what we really need to be focusing on, the innovation that comes from the bottom.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because there is African Union and other unions in Africa that would maybe make the Pan-African dream a reality, I believe so much. In the global north, where systems are more structured, why are burnout, disengagement, and quiet quitting still so common?
Again, I would say it's not necessarily the work culture, it's, you know, the perception that you get from social media that your life would be so much better if only. So with all of this alternative reality, I think a lot of people decide to sort of step away from work, you know, not work those long hours. The thing that had the biggest impact, I would say, on work culture in the global north is COVID, you know, the lockdown, COVID-19.
I think it affected everyone
because
around the globe.
It became about from home. But of course, you can only work from home if you've got access to the Wi-Fi, you know, so again, it comes back to money to be able to have those things, to be able to do it. And I think we need to be focusing more on how the benefits of lockdown, as tragic as it was, around the change in work practices can be utilised in situations like Nigeria, where can hybrid working, smartphone working, that digital nomad mentality be utilised. Now, as a media organisation, for us, we can instantly tap into that, because what that allows us to do is have experienced, professional, mature-looking, educated, those that are continuing to educate themselves, people with a smartphone in all of the states that we have in Nigeria that can create meaningful content that we can use. But how can we build on that? How can we have storytelling labs in all of those states where we're going out and finding those stories that can be told by young people, particularly about their lives, that can help maybe inform some policy? Because ultimately we want the people in governance to make good policy.
Would you say that we're raising a generation that wants success quickly but has not been trained to respect process?
Absolutely, and I think that's dangerous, because what it means is there's nothing to fall back on. Yeah, and if you look at the certain things that you need to do to build a successful business, you know, solid ground, cash flow, being able to, you know, be well networked and collaborate with people, understand the value of a work culture, that's very difficult when you've never experienced that. I think, a lot of businesses fail when they've got a fantastic idea but never get the support they need because they've not got the ability to articulate that to others. Write a good business plan, for example. I understand how cash works. Now, if you went to a food vendor on the street and didn't use fancy terms necessarily, but started talking to them about, sales, marketing, pricing, budgeting, cash flow, supply and demand, that person could run a business, yet they only might be selling yams or cassava on the side of the street, and that's devalued. Whereas the value that person has running a business could actually be used in a corporate setting to bring that culture where maybe sometimes it's about the boss and how clever the boss is, and don't we have fancy offices and I want you to do this. Let's proactively embrace AI, and can it help us to expand the work that we do? And we need to be valuing the business ethics, not valuing who the person is, and give these people an opportunity.
So in your opinion, what happens to national development when societies normalize lateness, poor follow through, weak quality control, and excuse making?
I think it's very damaging. It's damaging to the national psyche. And also it's a stereotype that is played out everywhere else in the world. So for example, like we talk about Africa time. So like, it's the event will start at 2 p.m. Maybe. It will maybe start at 2 p.m. The chances are it will start whenever people arrive. But there's also that kind of, how many meetings you can have in a day, what kind of progress you can make. Because as soon as it becomes normalized that it's perfectly acceptable to turn up late for work or to turn up late for a meeting and stuff, you're affecting productivity. More could be done if we'd started on time. You would have heard the person that was speaking first, at a conference. And I think that's the thing that's really sad when I'm at a conference here in Africa, in Nigeria, where you see, some of the first speakers don't necessarily have a full audience. Yet by the time you get to the last person speaking, it's full, but they didn't say anything as insightful or as impactful as the first person that spoke. So.
This problem is more than economical. It is cultural, it is moral, it is psychological, and that is where the conversations get even more serious for us if we want to change the narrative. So, and let's talk about culture of distraction, comfort, and low standards. Are people more distracted today than ever before?
I believe so, yeah.
What has happened, or what has the phone done to deep work?
I think it's normalized short attention span. So what happens then is if you've got a longer, deeper sort of, task you have to do that takes a bit longer, or even talking about strategy, talking about impact, trying to understand the bigger picture, the smartphone, with its speed of information and attention span has really impacted work culture. But I've seen that teaching students in the university in the UK as well, where suddenly they were unable to engage in an hour's conversation. There was something I read just before I came away, and it said that a smartphone has impacted young people to the extent that film lecturers are saying that they're teaching entire courses now with graduating students that have not watched a single film because they don't have the attention span to even watch a film.
Of course. I think that's really a big thing for us as well. Myself, if I'm reading a book, in no time, the dings from my phone just distract me. I'm not able to do maybe 5 pages a day. But before the phone, we're able to create time, give a whole day reading a book or watching a film that will be impactful. That's something we need to maybe work in terms of storytelling to change the narrative.
And if you ask anybody that uses their phone in that way and can't read more than that, and they see someone reading a book, there's a sort of slightly mystic, how are you able to do that? And they go, well, I put my phone down. So we look at it as if it's magic, but or they've invented fire, whereas in fact all they've done is they've made a conscious choice to not let a timeline
That's
dominate.
discipline, right? Yeah. That's discipline, because the phone even gives you an opportunity. It gives you time to check your screen time, to prioritize some certain things. But distraction, of course, were just those young persons that will keep scrolling indiscriminately on the internet. In your view, what are the 3 most dangerous phrases in a declining work culture?
The 3 most dangerous phases?
Yes.
Or phrases?
Yeah, phrases, yeah.
This won't take long.
Yeah.
oh, don't worry about that. Yeah. And I'm right.
Because I think these are the things that we come in contact with every day. Is mediocrity becoming socially tolerated because excellence now looks too demanding?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, people are just happy to good is good enough. Now, don't forget, my good might be someone else's unattainable excellence.
Yes.
Yeah, so I know when I can have a good day, as John Costa, when I have an excellent day, as John Costa, I look like I'm on a completely different planet. But that's because I've served my time and I've put the time in and I've done my homework and I've prepared and I've done the research and I'm always learning.
Yeah. So what does this do to institutions that are trying to build for the long term? For instance, S24 television, we're building for generations. And this work decline or work culture decline is something that would affect productivity, would affect the way that we do things. So what does this do to us and what can we do to maybe redirect the whole energy into something more meaningful and productive?
I think as an intergenerational approach, it's about we might not get it right in our generation where we're still alive. But that also means, I think one of the most impactful things that we've done with S24 under your guidance is to create the International School of Broadcast and Digital Media, because what that instantly says is it's not just about selling courses, it's about embedding opportunities and pathways for young people, even those that have done mass communication 20 years ago, but still have a passion and interest and probably a skill and something to offer to the media sector, to come and get one of those qualifications and become part of the S24 family. That means that, come on that journey with us so you can get involved, even if it's as a reporter out in one of the states making some content, we can empower you to help empower other people. So it's running an organisation that needs money to exist as a business, but it also needs to understand that as a business to exist, it needs to have people. And if we've not got the right people and the right people aren't coming out of an education system with an awareness of media or a work ethic that means that they can be part of something that develops that, then we need to nurture that and work with other universities and other education providers and say, well, look, do you want to partner on this? Do you want to collaborate on these courses? We've got 7 or 8 interns at the moment from the University of Abuja. They do our sports update, tech update, entertainment update. So you might see them on social media and they look fantastic for the 2 or 3 minutes they do that. But why they're here, they're immersed in the culture, understanding, they're running the the teleprompter, they're running all these different things. It's wonderful to talk to them. And those 12 documentaries I got in 24 hours of launching the S24 doc unit on Thursday, by Friday, over half of them were from the interns. Who knew? They've got these stories bubbling away inside. But it's because we're giving people an opportunity. If you want to be involved, you're part of the team. Bring it to the table.
Of course. So I think the next set of questions should be unavoidable for us if you want to change the narrative and redirect the energy of the younger population. If a society's work culture weakens, what does it cost?
What does it cost? I think we need to come at it from the point of view that we can't focus on how much it costs at the start. We need to be able to create spaces and environments where the older generation and the younger generation are having conversations about work culture. So it's not a younger person hearing from an older person about how good it used to be, or we had this. It's an older generation turning around and saying, well, actually, we were much more exploited then. We got a lot less, and what we brought home went on this and raising you. And then that young generation needs to have an understanding about, what parents have done and grandparents have done as well. We stand on the shoulder of giants. Only you and I are able to have this conversation today because of our grandparents and parents and the sacrifices they make. And I think what happens is for young people, social media and that lifestyle is seen as you've got to grip it and take it and make your life better. But it doesn't get you to think about what your life is like or what your life was like before you got a smartphone that allowed you the opportunity to engage with a smartphone. It seems to be a right rather than a privilege. It's a privilege that those phones work. If we lost all technology now, solar flare came along and wiped out everything digital, we'd have to go back to talking to with people.
Yes.
Would that actually mean the human race is more likely to survive because we then talk in the dark with something we have to kill because we can't get it from a supermarket?
Yeah.
So I think we really need to be honest with human development in its exponential state is not necessarily the best it's ever been. I think it's the most fragile it's ever been because it can be so easily lost and taken
I
off.
think people would freak out if you bring the idea of something wiping the technology off, and we're back to those days when we talk more on the dining table, you're able to interact. But nowadays, you're on the dining table with your family and everyone is on their phone. You can't even spend 5 minutes of quality time together without glancing. Is there something on your phone, or is there maybe a notification that you need to address? It's really very challenging to change the mindsets of young people. And that's why we're seeing a lot of bad vices going on. What does the declining culture cost the country?
I think it's easy to sit here and say that Nigeria, which has all of the resources it could possibly want, with a population that can do everything that it needs to do to make it better, is not where it needs to be because of politicians. I think, yes, there are governance issues and issues with politics and misappropriation and, corruption and graft and brown envelopes and all those sorts of things. But that is everywhere else in the world. It's not a Nigerian thing, So what we need to do is take a step back and then really start thinking about how we can change that narrative through dialogue in a meaningful way with people that we shouldn't just be talking to, but people that we need to talk to, who are our natural allies, who can help you. If you're a single voice trying to change something, and we're all running around trying to be better, we're going to bang into people and stuff. Well, there's people that run things that like us to do that. If we were suddenly able to all come together and just start making some progress about, well, how do we improve this? How do we use technology to help us? How do we solve healthcare? How do we solve the transport issues? That all of those questions, the answers are all there. They're all waiting. And I think we really need to be rethinking how we do that. For me, it's about if we can tell stories about people that have got solutions to some of these problems, people start saying, well, actually, I could do that. They've got exactly the same as me. I don't need money to do that. What I need to do is just change the way that I see the world and what I want to achieve.
In your opinion, how do declining standards in small places, maybe a newsroom, maybe one classroom or one ministry or government agency eventually become national decline for any country?
It's a slow rot. We've seen it in our education system where teachers just aren't valued. You know what I mean? When you think about it, how could you parent 30 children for 8 hours a day? Actually, that teacher probably spends more time with your child than you do as a parent because you're working or whatever and they're doing other stuff. So I think, something like valuing teachers. So we talk about education and the system, but, there are fantastic teachers out there that are doing great work. How do we look at that good practice, and make it best practice for others?
Yeah.
And of course, teacher training, being aspirational. I mean, Mr. Mukhtar said something to me earlier today. He's the young lady he's mentoring here. And I said to her, have you done a media thing? He said, no, she did a degree in geography, which in Nigeria just means that you're probably going to be a teacher. And I was like, well, as a journalist, my understanding and education in geography and history, I use more with my understanding of sociology as being a journalist.
And I think for us, it might be an avenue to create content that are related to geography, which people are shying away from. I think that's something to think about because there are courses that if you study in Nigeria, it feels like there is no pathway for you than to go to the classroom to teach. Due to time, we need to quickly wrap up. If this trend continues for another decade, what kind of workforce are we likely to produce? In a very short answer. If this trend, the decline, continues for another decade, what kind of workforce are we likely to produce?
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? I think I would give you a different answer if AI wasn't on the scene. I think we may be able to catch up with the decline that we've got through using AI if it's used in the right way. We need employers like ourselves who value employees' previous experience. Even pivot the interview, as we've done several times when they've come for a particular job and then suddenly realise they've got skills for another job. Well, why aren't you doing that? Well, it's because they've never been given an opportunity. So can we pivot you into an... So we're very lucky from that perspective. Yeah. I think it's using AI in a way that doesn't replace people. It enhances people's ability to be able to function and work in that workplace and just really be aspirational, because in the next 10 years, there'll be 2 more presidents and government cycles. I think we really need to be coming at it from the point of view of how many times have we been told that things will be getting better, but we never hold people to account. So as with everything, it comes back to governance and accountability.
Let's end with solution before the rapid fire. I'll take a few seconds of our time. Your final thoughts. What does society gain when work regain dignity?
I think it regains a sense of itself in pride. You know, I come across, we had an interesting situation in November where Donald Trump threatened Nigeria, and we were at the NICTA conference, and a guy stood up and was starting to talk about, you know, Nigeria doesn't do this, Nigeria doesn't do that. And the MC on the stage turned around and he said, my brother, let's just be proud and positive as Nigerians about we've got the ability to solve this thing. And people clapped. Yeah. And yeah, I've got goosebumps then. And the only reason he did that, I'm a proud Nigerian. The only reason he did that, I think, was for the first time, being proud to be a Nigerian wasn't just about the football team.
Yes.
Yeah. Or a sports personality or someone famous in Nollywood. It was actually that as a country, we felt threatened. And therefore, we've got to get over our divisions and find a way to work together to be Nigerian.
As a unanimous,
and it was interesting. And I think it's finding that ability to be Nigerian again. It's not just
And
football.
let's quickly jump into the rapid fire short answers. We're listening up because you've been talking, and there should be the last one that gives you the opportunity to just rack your brain sharp and just give short answers. Let's start with discipline or talent.
Discipline.
Speed or depth.
Depth.
Passion or consistency.
Consistency.
Comfort or growth.
Growth.
One word for work culture in Nigeria today.
Passionate.
One word for work culture in Africa today.
Innovation.
And one word for the global North work crisis.
Laziness.
One thing young people must stop normalizing.
Lateness.
Okay, and one thing leaders must start rewarding.
Commitment.
And one thing institutions must protect at all costs.
Integrity.
One sentence. What kills excellence fastest?
Mediocrity.
And lastly, one sentence. What restores it?
Education. People being educated, feeling empowered.
Thank you so much, John Costa, for joining us on S24 Insight, the special edition. This conversation reminds us that the crisis of work culture is not about jobs. It is about standards, about attention, about discipline. It is about whether society still have the patience to build anything that lasts. Because when work becomes disposable, institutions becomes fragile. When efforts becomes shallow, results becomes weak. And when excellence becomes rare, decline begins to look normal. So here is the question we leave you with today. If we continue to normalize low standards, distractions, and disposability, what kind of future are we really building? I am Halima Abdurrauf, and this has been S24 Insight Special Saturday Edition. Bye for now.